Good morning, New Zealand, and welcome to another episode of Wreck and Roll. I'm your host, Mark Pacey from the Wairarapa Archive, and I'll be taking you through 4 more shipwreck stories today. I've actually got a special request coming up later on. It's a fairly lengthy piece of music, so we're going to get straight into the story now, get that out of the way, and then play this piece of music for you. I'm sure you're looking forward to that one. So we're starting off with number 33. This is the story of the Emerald. The Ketch Emerald was built in Canterbury in 1865 by J.T. and M. Brown. She was 54 feet long, 16 feet wide, weighed 40 tonnes and was registered in Lyttelton. Over the next decade and a half, the Emerald kept up a steady but quiet life. She was used to transport timber around the country and was quite a reliable coastal worker. She travelled from Lyttelton to Whitby, near Porirua, to Whanganui, up to Auckland and back again. In September of 1882, the Emerald sailed from Foxton with a load of timber for Kaikoura and Lyttelton. She arrived at Kaikoura harbour and proceeded to sail up the dock, unaware of danger that lurked just below the waterline. As she came up to the wharf, her hull dragged along a rocky ledge, opening a gash along her side. Echoing the fate of the Titanic 30 years later, water flooded into the gash, and the ship soon foundered. She keeled over and lay on her side in Kaikoura harbour. Her cargo of timber was saved, but the Emerald now presented a problem. She was blocking entry for steamers that were waiting to berth. The workers at the docks issued a statement to the Star that efforts are being made to right her and float her up the beach. The following month, the Emerald was salvaged. Using empty barrels that were placed in her hull at low tide, the Emerald was raised and hauled up the beach for patching. Once the Emerald was clear of the dock, a contract was issued to remove the treacherous rocky ledge. In January of 1883, she was towed into Wellington by the steamer Waikato for repairs. In that same month, she was sold. By February, she was repaired and sailing again, but it was to be a short revival. In March of 1883, the Emerald sailed from Oamaru for Wellington with a cargo of oats, pollard, which are the remains of the inner kernel of wheat after milling, and potatoes. All went well until the Emerald approached the bottom of the North Island. A strong wind rose up and the crew found themselves in rough seas in the dark of night. Trying to spot the light at Pencarrow Head, they continued to sail north. Day's light revealed they had sailed into Palliser Bay. The sea was still rough and they were being driven towards shore. Despite the crew's best efforts, the Emerald grounded in the late afternoon. The seas remained rough and those on board had difficulty getting off the stricken vessel. They were helped by locals on the shore, who hauled them in by grabbing a rope the crew had attached to a log and thrown overboard. The Emerald's cargo was destroyed by water leaking into the hull. Captain Backstrom of the Emerald was initially optimistic that the ketch could be salvaged by towing it back to sea with a steamer. It was realised this would be a difficult job and, rather than pay for the recovery, the Emerald was sold at auction. In May of 1883, the steamer Napier made for the beached vessel. Despite fine weather, a heavy surf made recovery too difficult, and Napier returned to port without the Emerald. It was reported that the ketch was high on the beach and that further recovery would have to wait until the summer months. In December, the Emerald was again put up for auction. Her fittings, which included her sails, chains, spars, lamps, compass, wheel, and other gear, were all sold in separate lots. The hull remained where it came ashore and fell victim to the conditions and faded from memory. An article in the New Zealand Herald in 1909 said the Emerald was supposed to have foundered off Kaikoura. No mention was made of Palliser Bay. In the 1960s, a rusty anchor was found at Ocean Beach by Ray Holmes, who took it back to his batch. There it resided until 1980, when it was donated to the Historic Places Trust. In 1981, it became a symbol and memorial to all of the ships lost in Palliser Bay. Whether it was from the Emerald is difficult to say. The auction notices in 1883 stated that the ketch's anchors were some of the lots that were up for sale. Regardless, the anchor is a fitting memorial to the Emerald and all other vessels and lives lost in Palliser Bay. Right, now time for a piece of music. So this particular one is going out to my friend Greg. I don't know whether he's listening, but he can always tune in later on. This is a fairly lengthy piece of music. It's one of the longer pieces by this particular band. I know he's a huge fan of this particular band. I hope you are too. This is Rime of the Ancient Mariner by none other than the Kings of Metal, Iron Maiden.
Mesmerized as a wine of the wedding, stay here and listen to the nightmares of the sea. sinks down like lead into the sea. Then down it falls, comes around.
So that one was special going out to Greg. It's a rather brilliant song, and believe it or not, they actually do play that song live. It must be one heck of a workout. All right, straight back into it. We are now up to, what is our number up to now? Number 34. This is the story of, I've lost it, I'm sorry, Golden Isle. The Golden Isle was a 78-ton schooner and was 75 feet long. She was built in Mahurangi in 1868, and her first port of registration was Auckland. She had quite a busy career sailing around the country. In late 1875, she caused great concern when she seemingly disappeared while on her way with a cargo of coal for Russell. It was thought she was lost, but she eventually sailed into port. Rough weather had caused her delay. By 1882, after 14 years at sea, she was in need of a tune-up. After docking, she was given a new false keel, railing, lining and hatches. She had some of her decking replaced and the whole of her deck recaulked. The following year, she was now sailing throughout the Pacific, which included stopovers in Tonga and Fiji. She was at sea in the Pacific when a storm hit and was lucky to escape severe damage. On the 7th of November 1884, it was reported that she had gone ashore in Palliser Bay. An account of the stranding was later given by the ship's cook, Henry Chaffee. On the evening of the 6th of November, the Golden Isle struck heavy seas and strong winds which she battered throughout the night. The next morning the crew saw the coast of Palliser Bay, which was all cliffs and dangerous rocks. All available sail was raised, and the Golden Isle was given a reprieve as she sailed back out into deeper water. The winds drove her back in, and soon the cliffs were visible again off the bow. All of her sails, bearing the half-rolled mainsail, were torn away. The only way to save the vessel now was to try and beach her. She did not come to rest gently. As the hull ground against the shore, large waves crashed over her deck. One swept the captain off his feet, and he tumbled down the hatch into the hold. The result was that he was somewhat severely knocked about. Chaffee leapt down, and with the help of another crew member, pulled the captain out and onto the deck. Then they helped the rest of the crew safely off the stricken schooner by means of a rope which they had secured to the shore. The captain and one of the crew remained with the stranded ship while the rest made their way to Wellington. Once they arrived and relayed the news, a team of carpenters made their way to the wreck site to prepare the Golden Isle for refloating. One of them, Mr. Hurlstone, recalled the recovery operation 50 years later in a commemorative newspaper article. The Golden Isle was high and dry when we landed at Palliser, and we proceeded to turn her around, bow down to the sea. It was unusual to launch a vessel like that, but I had reason for doing so. In order to make use of her windlass, a device used for moving heavy objects, the anchor in hauling her clear. When we got her facing seawards, I telegraphed to Wellington for the Napier to come out and tow her off from the bay. When she was off, the salvage was attempted by the steamer SS Oreti. The Napier is not mentioned. On the 11th of December, but she did not make it to the site. She had to turn back due to foul weather, but vowed to return to finish the job. 5 days later, the paper reported that the Golden Isle had been recovered and was now safely back in Wellington, although one paper did not quite get the facts right. The schooner Golden Isle, which was beached at Pelican Bay some time ago, has been successfully launched and brought to Wellington. After arriving back in Wellington, the Golden Isle received an overhaul to make her ready for maritime travel again. In January of 1885, the Golden Isle arrived in Auckland. There she received another overhaul. But this was not so her owners would have a sound vessel to continue sailing. At the end of March, she was put up for auction. She did not reach her reserve and remained unsold. In April of that year, she was purchased by Captain Cunningham and started a new life as a lighter, a vessel used to transport goods and passengers from moored ships, and operated out of Manukau. At the end of 1885, the Golden Isle sailed for Sydney, but ran into trouble. becoming stranded in the Clarence River in New South Wales. She was later refloated with no major damage. The following year, she was run into by steamer SS Balmain in the Fitzroy River in Queensland, and this time she was damaged, but was repaired and continued to sail. In 1888 she ran into trouble yet again, but this time her luck had run out. While off Stanage Bay in Queensland, she was caught in a storm and was completely wrecked. Her remains were sold at an auction at nearby Rockhampton for £11. Alright, straight into the next one. This is the SS Waitaki. The SS Waitaki was built in Scotland in 1876, and on 7th of July that year she was sighted steaming through the Suez Canal on her way to New Zealand. She was owned by the Oamaru and Dunedin Union Steamship Company and was expected to arrive in New Zealand in 3 months' time. On the 3rd of October 1876, the SS Waitaki arrived. Her journey had been largely uneventful except for 2 incidents. The first was when her propeller became disconnected and she had to travel under sail for 8 days. The other was when the ship's cook died after having a heart attack. The SS Waitaki was described in the papers as being built in Whiteinch, Scotland, by T. Wingate and Company. She was 161 feet long, 418 tons gross, and had 90 horsepower engines, consumed 8 tons of coal per day, and had an average speed of 9.5 knots. She had a comfortable accommodation for passengers, a large saloon, but no staterooms. Not all were excited to see her. One report was not very complimentary about the new vessel. She is, however, not taking to the eyes as far as outward appearance goes, and on board is somewhat cramped as regards to deck space, and when we state that with about 80 tons dead weight in, she draws 8 foot 10 inches. Later in the same article it was said the passenger accommodation was fine, and the SS Waitaki was made of sturdy materials. After a short spell being cleaned, repainted, and having her compasses readjusted, the SS Waitaki was ready to begin her new life in New Zealand waters. Over the next years, she offered regular service for passengers and cargo between Oamaru and Dunedin. During a curious voyage in May of 1878, after leaving Oamaru, the SS Waitaki passed through a flock of mutton birds. The numbers were described as being so great the sea was black with birds for hundreds of yards. In 1880, the SS Waitaki was sailing between Auckland and Wellington and was now owned by the Union Steamship Company of New Zealand. The following year, the SS Waitaki had an overhaul and had her compasses adjusted to keep them accurate. In March of 1882, the SS Waitaki was involved in a collision. When steaming out of Port Chalmers, she travelled too close to other vessels berthed there. While she just shaved past the Plucky, she struck the tug Kopultai, cutting deep into her hull. After reversing, the SS Waitaki was revealed to have only slight damage to her hull plates, which were easily repaired. The tug Kopultai, now with a large hole in her side, promptly sank. She was later refloated and repaired. Engineerman Craig Moffat of the SS Waitaki was named as the reason for the collision, as he had not reversed the engines fast enough when the signal had come through. On the 23rd of April 1887, Captain McIntosh of the SS Te Anau was passing by Cape Palliser when he saw distress rockets. Sailing to investigate, he found the SS Waitaki holed and on the rocks. The crew had escaped and were housed in a tent on the shore. Luckily, the SS Waitaki had no passengers and little in the way of cargo, so what little of value there was on board was able to be removed as the conditions were still calm. The story of her stranding came from the crew on the shore. When steaming off Cape Palliser, the SS Waitaki, now owned by the Kamo Coal Company, found herself in a heavy fog. She struck a rock and began taking on water. The captain made the decision to ground her onto the shore. The crew and cargo were beached safely, but the SS Waitaki received extensive damage. The SS Mana travelled to the site, but after experiencing heavy seas and being unable to make contact with the men they could see on the shore, the Mana returned to port. A special coach trip was organised which took the stranded crew to Martinborough. An inquiry was made into the stranding. After calling in witnesses, it was judged that the cause was due to Captain Pennell of the SS Waitaki putting too much reliance on the ship's log and steaming at full speed and poor visibility. His captain's certificate was suspended for 3 months, and he was ordered to pay the court costs of £8 and 11 shillings, roughly $2,000 today. A consideration to try and save the SS Waitaki was abandoned, as it was discovered that the damage to her was too great. An auction was to be held on the 18th of May for her hulk and her contents, which included an assortment of articles used by passengers on board, such as tureens, cutlery, cruet stands and bedding. By July, the winter weather had set in, and after a series of southerly gales, it was reported that what was left of the Waitaki had broken up in the surf. Right, time for another piece of music. This one, I assure you, is a whole lot shorter than the last one. This one is very synonymous with ships and things, mainly because of a large finned thing with big teeth, but there is a ship in it and it does sink, so it is relevant. This is John Williams. This was recorded 1975. This is the theme from Jaws. Isn't John Williams a brilliant composer? Right, on to our last story now. It's a shorter one, which I'm sure you're probably all a bit thrilled about. This is Thermopylae. So the Flying Fish was a cutter of 10 tons. By 1887, she was owned by Nicholas Hammond and her name had changed to Thermopylae. She left Wellington on the 29th of June 1887, bound for Port Underwood, Whanganui. It would not be the straightforward journey it was supposed to be. On the day of her expected arrival, it came and went. As time progressed, there was still no sign of Thermopylae. Papers all over the country printed articles of her disappearance, their tone sombre. Some anxiety is felt for the safety of the cutter Thermopylae, which left this port on Saturday week for Port Underwood and has not been seen or heard of since. The cutter was manned by 2 men, one of them being an Italian named Perotti. There was a moment of relief for the cutter Ada Darcy while sailing out of Port Underwood when a familiar cutter passed them going in. It was the Thermopylae. Rough weather had made a quick trip a prolonged one. She entered the port for a short period and was then off again for the return journey. By 5th of July, Thermopylae was off Wellington, unable to make it in due to the winds. Instead, she sailed further east into Palliser Bay. She rode out the night expecting to sail for Wellington the next morning. As sun rose, rather than sailing out into the bay, she found herself sailing towards the rocky shore. She dropped her anchors, but this only delayed the inevitable. She continued to drift towards the shore, the determined winds not relenting. She struck rocks. Her now weakened hull could not support the weight of her ballast, which dropped out through the bottom, taking the hull with it. The Thermopylae then filled with water and foundered. The 2 crew, G. Sinton and Pero Virgil, also recorded as G. Simon and Pero Virgili, had to swim the rest of the way to shore. They were not far from Whatarangi station and were taken in where everything done for them that could be done. After a rest they left south. Their destination was Wellington, and after a long trip they made it to Petone, just before the train left, travelling by rail the rest of the way. The Thermopylae was a wreck. Sinkin and Virgil had lost all of their belongings in the stranding. The wrecked vessel was valued at £120, but was not insured, so the pair were left empty-handed. It's not a very nice story. So, of course, we always finish with a joke. Unfortunately, I forgot to print that out, so I'm just going to check it on my phone. Bear with me here, because I can't let you go without your awful joke. Why couldn't the pirate learn the alphabet? Because he was always lost at sea. And that's one of the better ones. All right, that's it for me this week. We will catch up with you next week. Same rec time, same rec channel. Hope you have a great week. We will see you next time.